Welcome to NeedleXChange, conversations on the art of thread. Thomas Paradiso is a Washington-based artist who has been exploring the intimacy of gay culture through needlework for over 30 years. Using hand-embroidered quilting techniques, working on surfaces including leather and suede, and using traditional materials like doilies to mask the graphic parts of his subjects, John's work treads the line between pornography and personal portraiture. His art is unapologetic in its openness, and his expressions of the passion of gay love are both sensitive and sensational. In our NeedleXChange, we talk about how John's artistic career has run alongside the timeline of the HIV pandemic, the value in reappropriating homophobic slurs, and how his art has defined his own queer identity. As always, you can dive deeper into John's work on our YouTube channel, although his most graphic work can be found on his website. NeedleXChange is on a mission to bring textile art into mainstream culture, so if you are a fan of needlework, please share this podcast with people you know so that we can grow and shine lights onto other brilliant artists. Enjoy the show. Congratulations on being a winner.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I was surprised. I'm sure you got a lot of entries.
We got over 150 entries, which I was pleasantly surprised at, because when I first launched the competition, I was like, what if we get like 3 people from Scunthorpe or something like that, you know? So to get people like yourselves, to get people who have exhibited internationally was a real honor for me. And then it was just great because it was like there's such a variety of, like the way we did the categories, you know, just going hand embroidery for one means that cross stitch is fighting off against like really fancy hand embroidery. You know, it was nice to just put it out there and then see how it ended up. And yeah, you're like one of the winners. It was amazing.
I know. And I've been seeing you dropping the other winners, and it's really exciting work.
Yeah.
Some I was already following and some I haven't, so.
Yeah, exactly the same. This is what amazed me is, you know, to just discover. I think I never tire of the fact that new people come out of the woodwork. Like there were 2 entries in the competition that were cross stitchers. And I'm not saying I should know every single cross stitcher out there, you know, but when you meet somebody who's done something really innovative, like there's a girl called Katie Itter, and her stuff's really glitchy and really interesting. And it was just like, I was just like, oh, I love that, you know, just someone who comes in with a left field approach to something that you think. And this is what I always get excited by is it never gets tiring. You know, whatever medium you're working in, someone's always coming around the corner with a new idea. It just makes it really easy, really. Let's talk about your award-winning piece. Can you talk me through it?
So I was in this major quilt show at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston last year, and it was a beautiful show. I went to see it, and my quilt was actually a collage quilt. So it was in the modern section, and it wasn't actually a quilt. I mean, it looked like a quilt. I called it a quilt, but it was paper and wood and an exciting piece. But I just saw all these beautiful quilts that people made and these whole cloth quilts. And I decided that I was going to try to make one. And I've made a couple fabric quilts before too, but I didn't do a whole cloth quilt, which is a whole other beast in a lot of ways that I wasn't prepared for. But so I came home and this figure is this young man named Mitch. He was my nephew's boyfriend. So he sent me some pictures that I could use if I wanted to in my work. And in a lot of my stitch work, I use just figures from erotica. And so it was nice to be working with somebody who I actually knew the person and had a relationship with. So I came home. It took me a little over a year to finish it. It's all hand stitched, and it's in the style in which I do my smaller stitch work. You know, I do just contour drawings of the figure. I love contour. You know, you learn contour drawings in art school in Drawing 101. And there's something about that sort of naive line and stuff that I really like. And then I stitch out the background so the figure pops, and it's really just one kind of stitch. It's a straight stitch. The whole piece is straight stitches. It's just a lot of them, and this is what I ended up with. And originally I was going to coffee dye it, um, but once I got like 10 months into it and realized coffee has acid in it, and these are bed sheets, so they're cotton bed sheets. They're not even, like fabric that I bought to go. I was using these sheets that I had. I just decided I couldn't do it, so I added, and you can barely see it, but in person you can. There's just some pink stitching in the pansies, and the center is a little pink triangle in each of the pansies. So, and he's the Prince of Pansies, and I've been making these quilts and trying to make headboards that match them, and so a lot of the work hangs with a headboard. And I did make a headboard for this, and I can tilt my camera up, but I'm not 100% sure of it. I think I'm going to carve another crown into a headboard so I carved a crown out of a headboard. So there's a headboard
Okay,
above it.
wow. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, and you'll see that on my Instagram page, but I wasn't, I'm not wholly happy with the deconstructed headboard. I think it might be better to have, so I'm still working on that. So that's why I didn't get, I just got into a quilt show in upstate New York with the quilt as well. I just found out this week, without the headboard, because I haven't really resolved it. But I'm trying to make this series called Bedtime Stories. And so they're quilts, whether collage quilts or fabric quilts, with a headboard above it. And you can see some of that on my Instagram page, the headboards.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Because you had is it was it the men working one, one of your early pieces, and you've got this deconstructed bed around it, which I guess just puts it in another story, kind of.
Yeah, I was a photographer through undergrad and graduate school, and then after I left school, I made photographs, and they started becoming more and more three-dimensional. Like I was getting these old clocks and putting the photographs as the face of the clock. And it was about time and running out of time. It was all during the 80s and early 90s. Um, I lived in New York, and I did a lot of work with people with AIDS, and my boss was a person with AIDS. And so I started, time and running out of time and all that was a big issue. And then I started carving headboards and using headboards as the thing that I put my photographs on. And in a lot of my photographs, self-portraiture was in the bedroom with men. I was chronicling sex and just talking about sexual acts and risk and love. And my friend had made me a quilt if I quit smoking. He said, if you quit smoking, I'll make you a quilt. And at the end of the summer, I didn't smoke, and he gave me this quilt, and it ended up in all of my photographs. And so it's this prominent quilt. And I started thinking about the bedroom, where that's, intimacy and sexuality really meet in the bedroom significantly. And so I started looking around, and instead of just doing the headboards, I started thinking about quilts. And I saw some quilts in these church basements, going to some recovery meetings, and I just was really interested in it. And then G's Bend was really big, and that was so interesting. And then, I now live in DC, but before living in DC, the only reason why I would come here is to like march on Washington, and I'd seen the AIDS memorial quilt when it was laid out. And that is like one of the most impactful public art pieces I've ever seen, and really touches me personally. So all of that was sort of a culmination to start stitching and trying to make quilts. And I thought, my men working quilt, I wanted to make quilts about surviving and living through the 80s and 90s, as opposed to the AIDS memorial quilt, which I really love, but not everyone did die. And I thought that I would call them survivor quilts, but I Googled it, and women with breast cancer have been making survivor quilts
Okay.
for a really long time.
Mixed
And
message.
so I was like, yeah, I'm never thinking that anything up first. So that's why I made it men working. And for that beginning of those quilts, I was using materials from construction sites as well as fabric. So it was the idea of construction, men working, and then men working to sort of stay alive and still be sexually active.
Because the trajectory of your work, the timing of you doing your photography and then being in New York at that time as well, it's like, this might sound weird, but like you and AIDS sort of happened around the same sort of time, kind of. You know,
I
you're
came it totally I came out late, like 22 in 1984, and maybe a month and a half later I was working a hotline for the AIDS Council up in my hometown. And from that moment on, volunteered or actually was paid to work in HIV prevention and caregiving. So uh, the only thing I didn't do, although I did do one protest, one action, was I wasn't a member of ACT UP. A lot of my friends were. I'm too afraid to get arrested. I don't ever want to be in jail.
right.
I'm paranoid and claustrophobic. So but I did do the Huffman LaRoche action. I needed to do one because I was so impressed with ACT UP
Mm.
and their energy for survival.
And you
So
were
yeah,
professionally involved as an AIDS counselor for quite a few years, right?
yeah, about 20. I ran a lot of groups for gay men, and I sat in bars and tested men and given them results 2 weeks later for years. It was a really great job and really great work. Just you know, once the sort of 2000s hit and the protease inhibitor was really working well and stuff, my life sort of shifted and I got to work in the art world. I did become an artist in resident at some area hospitals here, working with a cancer organization, where I would go in and make art with people who were primarily people with who were working had cancer, but I would work with any patients that the nurses pointed me to, and their families. So I did that for about 3 years here, and now I just make art
There was a bit
and
that
I run a gallery too.
oh yeah. There was a bit I pulled out of your statement where you said before the year 2000 my work was about life and death. Since then it has been about life in general, and I guess was that tipping point then?
Yes, exactly. In when I moved to New York City in 1991, late 91, I had a job waiting for me. I was the personal assistant for Robert Farber, who was a painter. And I was his personal assistant and studio assistant for the last 3.5 years of his life. And I also was madly in love and moved in with my boyfriend who lived in New York. And he was also a person with AIDS. And I was doing all this work with people with AIDS. So although I do not have HIV, I was involved in my community and the HIV community, and a lot of friends and family, were people living with AIDS, and was part of my life.
Now I'm obviously an Englishman who's I'll be fairly ignorant. So what's the status with AIDS these days? Do people still get AIDS? Obviously people are living a long time with it now. Where is it at?
Well, so people get HIV and
Okay.
AIDS is and people can still get HIV, but there's really remarkable protease inhibitors for people who are living with HIV, and there's also PrEP and different things to for people who aren't HIV positive to stay HIV negative.
Hmm.
So you combine those two things where people with HIV are undetectable because of drugs, and people are taking PrEP to block the virus, and it's a relatively modern world in drug therapy around that. I'm not, a scientist or overly well
No.
versed in it. It's just from what I know. I have two
Well,
young gay nephews, so they're really like that. that's how I hear about a lot of things too.
It's fascinating because I think it's one of those things that it was quite rightly such a big deal. Then it sort of falls off of the radar, but I guess it's still part of the culture, right?
Yeah, it's not on the radar like it was then, but still highly important, and a lot of important people are involved in that community and making sure men and women stay healthy.
Hmm. So you started, yeah, you studied photography, and as you said, then the work became a bit more three-dimensional, and somewhere down the line, textiles kicked in as part of that. Can you sort of explain that evolution?
Yeah, so it really was about the AIDS memorial quilt and its effect on me. The G's Bend women talking about life and stitching in their documentary. Um, Church basements having s- quilts that depict downtown Washington D.C. and all the streets, and the my coming off all of these sculptural headboards and wanting to, I also like built a bed in the woods and covered it in sod to try to make it grow, and was never really successful, but it took me like a year and a half to finally get unsuccessful with it. But so the bed in the bedroom was in all of my photography. It was a big issue. And so when I started to think when I moved to DC, I really started to reflect on the March on Washington, the AIDS Memorial Quilt, the 80s and the 90s, which were very significant. And, it takes a long time to process that stuff. And, it was a really heightened time in my life. And, I was, I was getting older, so I didn't really want to be taking pictures of myself having sex with my husband anymore. I was like, that's probably better for the younger men. And but it was also evolving, and then I just started to. I thought, about making quilts out of stuff from construction sites and images of men that were online. Sort of this modern post protease inhibitor world.
Mm,
And for someone like me who wasn't just coming out, I've been out for a long time, and it because their horizon was changing, I wanted to start making these quilts. And then quilts have designs on them for the quilting. I was just following I did like a log cabin style with this stuff, and so I was just following stitching the ditch. And but the I thought, well, maybe I could stitch a figure and have figures all over my quilts. So I stitched this figure, and it was a contour drawing, and then I stitched out the background, and sort of that style just became something that I was interested in, and didn't think it would work on the quilts, but thought maybe it could be work on its own. I started stitching inside the hoop and keeping it in
hmm.
the hoop. uh it just worked out that way. But even though all the work that's in the hoops are actually quilts, I mean, there's a back fabric, batting, and the top fabric. So I'm always stitching through 3 layers anyways. I just leave it in the hoop, and it's so taut that it doesn't show a lot of volume all the time. But so that's just sort of became something I was making, but they take a really long time, and
Mm,
my hands hurt. So I
mm.
was also collaging with fabric and stuff, so I could just always be working, but using my hands differently, um, which is helpful. And I also, if it takes me a year to stitch a piece, I want to make more than one piece a year. So I wanted to also do work that was a little bit faster, but my collage work really ends up not being faster because I have to prep the fabric and cut it's just like art just takes a really long time, and I just have to stay healthy and live long enough to make it. So it just evolved to also making quilts. I don't really think of myself as a quilter, but I've made some quilts and I'm making some more. So we'll see where it goes.
And I note as well that not only because you're hand stitching this stuff, aren't you? So you're giving yourself
Mhm.
plenty workout, but then just for fun, you'll do things on leather and suede just to really punish your hands that bit further.
Well, leather fetish is such
Mm.
a community, and I'm not a leather man, but I'm very attracted to that kind of masculinity and sort of the aura around that whole community. Um, the whole leather community, not just gay men, but gay men in particular. So, stitching pansies on leather is fun and funny to me. And my friend would tell a story about like being at the Eagle and overhearing two leather guys talk about a sale at Barney's. And like that sort of like makes me laugh, and it's such a real thing. And so to put like some pansies on leather, I'm thinking of those guys, like
Mhm.
that's sort of where things and it's where they start in my head, but they end up so totally different. So
Yeah. And the pansies are very much a recurring motif, aren't they? They appear in all different kinds of formats throughout your work.
yeah, yeah. They're very hardy flowers, so they have some high disease resistance, and they live with a little snow on them. So it's funny that gay men are called pansies
Mm.
because they're really strong flowers. They're also really pretty, and they're really great because they stand in for all gay slurs.
Mm.
Like it's a slur, but it's an easy one. Also, I can hang pansy work in my mom's house. So I wanted to be able to give my mother stuff. So it's a win-win all the way around. Um,
Would it be safe to say that there's some work that you might not hang in your mother's house?
yeah, yeah. I mean, my mother has come to some shows in the early 90s that were all photographs of me having sex. And, she is a trooper. I really love her for it.
Were there any, like, what were the post-show conversations like on those ones?
You know, my family's really good at not talking about the elephant in the room. So,
Brilliant. With the using the term pansy, taking terms that are used as slurs and then very much presenting them to people's face, do you find that to be like an effective tool? Because I guess part of it is it's like just re-owning those words, isn't it? It's reframing them and going, like you say, it's a strong flower, and when you look at it, it's a thing of beauty. Do you find it an effective tool to like challenge people's paradigms?
it's I think of it less as challenging and more as, it's all stuff to come out for me. Like my work comes out, like you see my work and you're like, "Oh, that's a gay guy." Gay guy made this. So, whether, and this is pretty mild. I mean, I wanted to make sure that it was stuff I could enter into quilt shows and stuff.
Mm.
So, I've done some work where it's like an erection is in it, but I do that like every 10 pieces because no one's going to hang it in their house, and I can hang it in my house. It's all over the place, but it's a thing. And, so I try to think of that and broaden my audience, but not water down my, um, the integrity of my work. And the pansy, it sort of fills the gap, like calling him the Prince of Pansies is, it's a sexual piece. I mean, he is being cheeky, pun intended, I guess. And he's, and there's pansies all around him,
Mm.
like you can't get away from that he's a gay guy. And my work is about that. And it's not, I try to, there's a lot of my collages could be gay, bi, trans men. There's no genitalia in them. There's like doilies over them. They're layered. Even the work, these pansy pieces, they're that's chiffon fabric that I
Mm.
mounted over images and then sprayed. And so it it just fortifies sort of I slur before you slur. So it takes the power away from anybody really, criticizing me for being gay. And that's,
Yeah.
I have internal homophobia that's sort of lifelong. We have so I live in an arts district and we have open studio. And, people will walk into my studio and sometimes bolt out. Sometimes they're giggling, like there's and I get serious conversations too. But then sometimes people, aren't into it at all. They think they're too sexual or whatever. It's the way it is. In those moments, I wish I was a watercolorist painting flowers, but I'm not,
But I had that with Leah Emery, who's a cross stitch artist, and she would do a lot of like 1970s retro porn in cross stitch. And by pixelating it, it's the sort of thing where when you sort of lean back and you squint at it, you get a sense of what the image is. A lot of your work, particularly the stuff with doilies, those doilies are very well placed. So in some ways, you're not showing anything rude, are you? You're just treading that line very carefully.
Yeah, and there's some newer ones that are called bedroom windows, which have like lace curtains over them, and those the men are having sex. But I put the viewer in the position of they're looking in the window, so they're the voyeur, and if they don't want to look in the window, then you just walk away. And everything is placed really well, like the density of that curtain, because there's floral, and then you can see through the curtain, is strategically placed like over the mouth and genitalia. So it a lot is left to the imagination, but you don't have to have a really great imagination to know what's going on.
Yeah.
But that work I made that work for an erotic show, so I wanted it to be more erotic. I do carefully place the doilies and stuff because if I'm going to put layers on, I want them to work in my favor. And this way somebody can enjoy it. The stitched pieces, even the ones that are more sexual or explicit, show genitalia, they're fabric. They're line drawings on fabric. So the way one might walk up to a photograph of the same man is a totally different experience. Even though a photograph's not real, you think it's real. Like it's real enough. And when it's stitched, it really takes the layers off. And I had a friend of mine who said that what she appreciated was she wasn't embarrassed to stand in front and look at my work because it was soft and fabric and
But that's like a known thing, isn't it? The familiarity that we have with textiles, the inherent nostalgia that puts it in a safe place in the first place, gives you the realms to explore content. And I guess that's the perfect example what you're saying there.
Yeah, and also traditionally men don't stitch, although men have always stitched, just like traditionally women don't build houses. My first girlfriend builds boats. I mean, I wish I could build a boat like this woman builds boats. So like stereotypes come from someplace, but that's where it is, like to stitch and sew and collage, it leans towards the feminine, not the masculine for some reason in maybe in a straighter world. For me, it's really about a fluid masculinity where I can use power tools and a sewing machine. And I'm scared of all of them. Like, I'm worried I'll hit my hands with a hammer or drill as well as running things through my machine. So
Do you think the use of textiles though permits you to explore sexual acts that are more graphic, and that side of gay culture because it's already giving that bit of diffusion for people?
well, I've always shown graphically explicit work because I thought it was important to talk about sex in the 80s and 90s between men, especially, my partner when I had a partner who was HIV positive. I wasn't. I thought that was an important conversation to have. And so I used it in my work. But I think it's just a lovely way, textiles, to talk about it, because, the bedroom, so all the headboards I use are found on the street. And so inherently someone's intimacy is in that headboard, whether they just slept next to it or did anything beyond that, right? There was use and it was in a room that is really intimate. The bedroom's an intimate place. I mean, I think naps can be intimate, and so to be making quilts, although none of them are ever going to go on a bed, they're inspired by the bedroom and beds. And so I find that there's something just soft and comfortable about working with textiles that I really like. And that they're sort of unpredictable too. Like fabric really does have a life of its own. So and I'm not well versed. Although, my gallery has 6 studios attached to it, and 2 of the other artists are textile artists, and they have a lot of information for me. So I do get I can talk to people, and there's videos and following all of your people inspire me and inform me on how to move
Y-
forward.
Yeah. Because actually, when you think about it, the bedroom's a place where we're very honest, isn't it? Partly because we're asleep and we're very innocent, but it's a place where people can be themselves and have that intimacy. So it does become somewhat of a sacred spot, and it feels like your exploded beds are a bit like a tribute to that.
Yeah, it's it's a sort of a flattened story of a thought about something that's bedroom related, you
Mm,
know. Because I've never been in the bedroom with this guy, but still he's a young sexual gay man in his early 20s who's also just got his master's in social work, and so he's going to do great things, and a nice guy, and so and I know that he's a very sexual guy, and so to make a piece sort of in tribute of him and the bed, making it a bedtime story is about celebrating, young sexuality. As an older guy, being an uncle and being in my 60s, it gets, I'm looking back too, thinking about myself as a younger man and then seeing younger men.
because the length of time you spend making these pieces, does that happen? Do you weave narratives for them as you're going on? By the time you finish a piece that's taken you 10 months, do you know that person as though they're a real person?
Well, it's interesting because to stitch your nephew's boyfriend so closely, I'm like touching the contours of his body in my work. So that's very interesting. It's I'm always it when I'm making work, it new work pops up.
Mm,
So it's more about like I had the thought of the quilt I'm working on here while I was making that quilt.
mm,
It working because I'm just doing stitch. There's no once the drawing's down and I do my first stitch through to see if I've made the figure correctly. Because like a nostril can just screw the whole thing up. Uh, so, once I'm sure of that, if I'm going to stitch out the background, that's just a million hours.
mm,
It's not any thought. Like I can watch TV and just look up at the sex scenes and then look back down as I'm stitching. Like it just you can do any. I can go visit my mom and talk to her for 3 hours and just stitch and stitch and stitch. I don't have to think.
mm, mm.
It's more in the very beginnings of the piece. But the piece I'm working on now, I printed fabric. I made pansy fabric. I mean, I've been printing black and white, grayscale pansies. And then I dyed it and made all these, I cut out all these appliques. So the background's going to be all applique this time.
Right.
But I'm excited about the new piece. You'll see it. I mean, I think it's only going to take me about 6 months. So,
Have you, I mean, do you do much machine work? Because obviously that's a massive time saver.
um, no, you know, there's, I feel like there's so many great machines that hand stitching will be really unique
Mm,
again,
yeah, 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 yeah,
and there's, I'm not, if you really look at my quilts, they're not really that good. I mean, I love this piece, but if you look at a quilter's quilts, they're like phenomenal. I have such a respect for people who make quilts and can sew. But there's something about doing it by hand that I just really love.
yeah. Mm,
I want to make it, and I'm afraid of my sewing machine. I mean, it can jam up. It does things, If I'm making a quilt that's a pattern quilt, like log cabin or something, I will stitch the top layer. And if I'm using like caution tape and danger tape, the plastics, I will use the machine because I need that stitch, that good stitch to hold plastic together until I quilt it down to the fabric.
mm,
But um, but for this, I think there's something nice about the hand quality to it because the foreshortening's off. I mean, I'm taking a photograph that has foreshortening. Like this, you can tell. But if you stitch this, it
Yeah.
looks fucking weird. And I the one I'm working on now, his arms are like this, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to look once I put the quilt up. If it's going to look like he has little tiny arms, but I may go in with some dyes too. So but there's something nice. It used to be more of a naive hand,
Mm-hmm.
but I've been stitching a lot now, and my lines get pretty sharp. So it looks a lot less naive than it did when I first started, but it still has that quality to it and very home sewn. There's something, it is about nostalgia a lot for me. It is about looking back and growing old as much as being sexually active and identity issues. I didn't think I would grow old. So to grow old is interesting, and there's a lot of people that I'm not growing old with that I would have been growing old with. So it's complicated, and that's not so much. It's in the work, but no one's going to see it but me because I know. And so it's a nostalgic thing. Also, my two grandmothers crocheted and stitched and embroidered everything just to make it pretty. So, like, I have all these towels that have a crocheted edge because they were inexpensive towels that they wanted to look really nice in their house. So, I wish they were around because they're really skilled. And I learned nothing from them because when they were alive, I was not trying to sew, I was trying to throw a ball or something. So, but I have all that stuff in my house, and it's touching to me, and I love that it's pretty and that they sat and did this stuff for their home. So hand stitching feels nostalgic, and I feel in touch with my grandparents in that way, that kind of thing. It's all in my head, but whatever to get through the day, right?
No. But I think that's a legit thing to say because I mean, like, the American quilt is part of the American story, and it's a form of documentary that people have used for a very long time. And your work is documenting things as you go through the different time periods. Then you've got that sort of arts and crafts layer that says if you're going to make something, make it beautiful. And the thing that I'm thinking is, you're entering that work into a quilt show. It will be interesting to see what the other quilters say because they're not that bothered about the content. They're looking at the form. They're looking at the way and the fact that you've hand stitched it means they'll appreciate that from a technical standpoint. So it's a good, like, sort of, it leapfrogs what the content is because, like, that quilt behind you, it's like seeing Michelangelo's David. They're not a million miles away from one another. It's just a naked guy. It's the context that makes you feel a certain way about it. And I feel like in a quilt competition, it won't be judged on, like I say, what the content is. It will be judged on the way you've delivered that content and the
Well,
process.
I don't think you can totally eliminate content because if you're jurying something, you have to stand behind every piece. You have to say, I wanted this because. And so I don't think, so it took, there was a show I wanted to enter. And when I realized I would never get the quilt done in time, I knew that I had now a year more to enter the show. So I finished my piece several months after the first submission date, waited the year, entered it again, and didn't get invited to be in the show. And I was heartbroken, right? Heartbroken. So, but I immediately went on one of those submission sites and found another quilt show and entered it. And it had a shorter length between submission and acknowledgement, and they took it. So we'll see what happens. And I'm going to go to the opening, and there's a whole quilt conference around it, and see what people think. And the jurors are these national quilt judges, like they're certified quilt judges.
Okay.
One's been doing it for a really long time. They've both been doing it for a while. So there is an art category, which is the category I entered. So, but I don't, it'll be interesting to see if there's any other like naked guys in the show. But a lot of times I'm in shows. Like I was in a show in Wichita, Kansas. It was a craft show, their annual craft show. And I entered it because my sister-in-law lived in Wichita, and I thought, well, we'll finally go visit her in Wichita if I get in this show. So I got in and we went, and it was, and but I looked at the juror was from New York. So I
Right.
said I got a shot to get in. And I'll tell you, I was the only guy with figurative work, let alone naked men.
Right.
And it is something to be the guy with the naked man instead of the guy with the beautiful patchwork quilt.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were like, that was what all the work was, like beautiful patchwork. I mean, it was like really high end craft. It was gorgeous. But I won best in show.
Oh, amazing.
So it
Yeah.
was really fun.
Yeah.
You know.
So I did a needle exchange with Joetta Maui, and we were talking about how textile art always gets called textile art. In kind of whatever context, they always stick the word textile on it so it doesn't get judged as being art by itself. And I wondered, you're in these two realms, aren't you? Because you're in textile art and then you're also in queer art. And you sometimes wonder if there'll ever be a day where your work just gets called art, or do you think the labels are intrinsic to it?
Well, I mostly just enter shows,
Right.
that are art shows.
Mm-hmm.
This is sort of my second, and the big quilt show in Boston. Someone knew of my work and told the curators, and they were coming to the Smithsonian to get a piece that the Smithsonian owned, and my studio's near there, so they came to visit me and they took a piece. I couldn't believe it. Um, and they just wanted to have a great show, so they had things in there that there was a quilt made out of film strips, so things weren't a fabric and 3 layers and stuff. So most of the shows I enter are queer shows,
Mm.
or shows about the figure, or a drawing show. Like I'll send a stitched piece into a drawing show because it's a drawing.
Mm.
And I know not many people, if any, are sending in stitched work. So it's different enough. And that pendulum swings both ways. It could be too different for the vision, or it could be different enough to add something to the show, or they just don't like it. Like I don't know because I'm not there. But so but entering this quilt show is a whole different thing. Like I have to put a little thing on the back left corner with my, like just things that I
Mm.
don't normally do. 4-inch sleeve. I don't think of those things. I just figure it out for myself.
Yeah.
And there's even like just like different rules. Um, but I'm really excited to be in a quilt show because I made a quilt. Like
Yeah.
so. I think it's going to be exciting to be with. I spent over a year stitching, like 5 days a week, 5 hours a day.
Wow.
Because at the end of 5 hours, my shoulders and neck, I just start feeling it. And if I go any further, I'm going to be in pain the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So I stop and go cook or whatever needs to be done. And I sometimes it's 7 days a week, but on average, I would probably say 5.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot.
Yeah.
So I want to be around people who like have put in that kind of time to make a wall hanging,
Yeah.
and see what they're talking about.
That's what I mean. I think
So
that
I'm
they'll
excited.
respect. I think they'll respect the work because they'll understand. Do you know what I mean? That's what I was sort of saying. It's like obviously the content's important, but they're going to be looking at how you've made that thing, how flat it hangs when you hang it on the wall, and all those sorts of things, and really come at you with a technical respect.
Well, no one can say I didn't put in the time because there's a lot of stitching. And that, part of that is, a way to couch the sexuality nature of the work. When I was in graduate school, it was very hard because I was making work where I was having sex with men, and my professors really didn't want to look at it. But I had to make it look like art, and I did, and it is art and was art, and uh, it's been a consequence of the work I make, but it's important. And if I could make something else, I would. But obviously, like this is the driving force of what I want to talk about. And I think like my graduate work could hang in the same room as this quilt and make sense.
Okay.
So, the mediums have changed, and some of the dialogue has expanded. That's sort of the life in general part. But it I've been making the same thing in different ways and talking about it. It's just a longer thought process around it because I'm living longer.
You said in an interview that if you had a book title, it would be called "Honoring My Feminine Side While Striving to Be More Masculine." And as someone who is the age that you are now, are you getting there? Have you settled into that tension a bit more, or is this still what the work's kind of exploring?
I think that's an ongoing process, because I think I'll never be as masculine as that idea
Mm-hmm.
of masculinity that I see in other people, and I've learned at this age not to judge myself by somebody else, but I have to remind myself of that while I'm judging myself looking at somebody else. So, uh, and I have a feminine side, like when I'm walking, it doesn't happen much these days, but for somebody to yell faggot outside the window as they're driving by you, it's not my masculine side they're responding to.
Mm.
So, I've always had to embrace that. Plus, I'm passive sexually, and I feel like that is has an implication to my life and my thought process. It's part of who I am, and it's all part of it. So, yeah, I always want to honor my feminine side, because I think femininity is powerful too.
Mm.
It doesn't mean weak and strong either. I mean,
Mm.
especially if you say something like that in front of a woman, they'll be like, "What are you talking about?" So, I was like, "No, no, no," because I never use the term "I cried like a little girl." Because the last time I did that, I almost got punched by a big girl. So I was like, I didn't mean any offense by that. Like that was more of an old school gay guy thing. I
Mm-hmm.
think I was saying, not a anti, woman or weak thing. Because I don't think that, But I have to think about my words, and you know, being seen as feminine by straight men growing up was challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed in the closet till I was 22. I would, engaged to be married to a woman. I tried to be straight. I put in my honest try. Just wasn't going to happen.
Mm.
But I would like to be really strong and masculine too. It's just not going to happen. So I'm like honoring my feminine side and striving to be more masculine.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's an ongoing core thing. My life is much broader than that. But when I'm trying to narrow things down for artist statements and things, I'm trying to get to core things, and that's a core thing that
Mm.
I know about myself. So to put a leather guy behind a doily, I
Mm.
think that's talking about that. Thinking about the gay leather men talking about a Barney sale, I think that's talking about that for me.
Mm.
um
Yeah.
so
Because that was the thing I was just wondering. I just feel like every decade you go through, I've got like 50s looming in the horizon for me. And every decade you go through, I think you can let yourself go a little bit more. That sounds wrong, but you don't have to beat yourself up about the things you're not anymore, and the way that other people think
Not if
about
you're a
you.
gay man. No, I'm only kidding. um yeah, I think that's true. And I also think you still, if you haven't done the inner work,
Mm.
it's you're going to be the same. And I've done inner work, and I'm still vain. It's hard to grow old and be vain, but I'm doing it
You're
because
doing
I
it
have a
well.
lot of vanity. I mean, I'm wearing black and it's cutting me here, all that stuff. This
Same.
is pre-planned. No, but it just, yes. But you also, what you're going to realize when you do turn 50 is that things and your body knows things.
Mm.
And it's a very different experience. I mean, I'm 61 and a half. So, but, also, when you think you're not going to live past 25,
Mm.
that's a conscious thing. And then, then you're still not sure ever. You tend to let things go in a different way as well when you get older. And so I'm also married. well, and I'm only married a year, but I've been with my partner for 23.
Right.
So I really just want his social security if he goes first, but and you have to be married for that, because marriage is a really weird institution. He didn't, it was not a great contract for him. Let's just say it was a great contract for me, not so great for him.
Yeah.
But we were together, and I always thought, that uh, a testament to our relationship was not being married and staying together for 23 years.
Mm.
But you know, marriage is really just a piece of paper, for a contract, for legality stuff, because we've been together forever. But also being in a relationship for that long and building a life, like on the other side of this wall is his studio, and we live not even a block from our studios, and we come here every day, and after the gym and stuff. So you let things go when you have a life that feels more like the life you wanted,
Mm.
and you're older. He's older than me, and he's in his 60s too, so we're looking back at things in a different way.
Mm. And do you, when you look back at like your early times, like you say, immersing yourself in your work, taking photographs of yourself and the kind of the imagery that you were producing 20, 30 years ago, how do you feel about it now? Because I guess it's kind of nostalgic, right?
Yeah, in a lot of ways it was the best work I've ever made, which uh it's like it was the most in touch with what I was living through. um so I cherish that work,
Mm.
and the experiences that surround it. um but with all of that said, I love being in my studio and just making art. I mean, the studio is the only place where I don't have to answer to anyone. It's the
Hmm.
only place in my life where I do not have to answer to one single person, and or consider them.
Yeah.
Uh, where everywhere else, just as being a decent human being, I will consider you. But
Yeah.
in my studio, I mean, if you come in and I invited you in, that's a different story. But when I'm here, it's just my own thoughts, my decisions. They have no consequences to anybody but me. I fail, I succeed. It's just me,
Mm.
and it's the only place that I feel that way.
Do you feel that your work is heading in a particular direction? Like if we talk again in 5 years' time, can you say now what you think you'll be working on at that time?
It's evolving. So now a lot of my life while I'm stitching is fantasy too. I will tell you that. So I fantasize that I've made 10 of these, and they're on one wall in this huge space, and on the other wall are 10 beds with quilts with headboards. I don't know if I have enough life left in me to make all the work I want to make. Because so my definition of success as an artist is I'm working on a piece, I've just finished a piece, and I have something in mind to make. And as long as I'm doing that, I feel successful. Now I have goals. I want to be in museum collections or in prominent collections. I want to be interviewed by you. Like there's goals, but just to be successful, because I live in an arts district, and there are hundreds of artists in walking distance of me, and at least 150 studios. And I've done a lot of community work here, and a lot of them are commercially successful. And I'm not overly commercially successful. I sell work, but I don't make work thinking it's going to be hot off the press.
Mm.
Like what people want to look at and what they want to own can be two different things. And I don't make work thinking commercially. So I had to think a different way of success, because I feel as successful as somebody who's commercially selling a lot of work.
Hmm.
And so that's why I came up with that. So I could just know I'm being successful.
Mm.
Um, but like I said, I have goals. I would love gallery representation or something. I don't even know if that's a thing anymore, but I would like it. Um, I would like to work in for a gallery that I just work really hard for 2 years, and you show some work, and then I'll go back and work hard again, and then I can show in other places too. But that's a fantasy. Um, so I think that it's going to evolve, but you know, it's slow. That's the only thing. If I really can only make one or two of these a year, and I'm not going to ask anybody to come and sit and stitch with me,
Mm.
um, And not that I have any, I think people who have assistants, that's great. I want to do it myself. I
Mm.
want it to be my work, all, to know that I did every stitch. We'll see what happens. But, I've been really lucky too with a lot. I'm in some good collections, and
Yeah,
I feel good about that.
I think that's great. I think that's great. I'm going to ask you some big important questions now, as if we haven't already done big important questions. Do you have a favorite album?
So I think my favorite album, I thought about this, is Nick of Time by Bonnie Raitt.
Okay.
And it has to do with, it was sort of the soundtrack to the love affair I had when I first moved to New York City, my lover at the time. And it was a great relationship experience. I love New York City. Like, I wish I still lived in New York City. I couldn't have the life I have now in New York City, and I go to New York a lot.
Mm.
Tons of friends there still. But when I moved there, I moved in with this guy and loving my life. And so that soundtrack was sort of our songs, like it was happening around us. So that is really and I love Bonnie Raitt too. So that's really my favorite album.
Do you listen to music while you're working?
I don't. I listen to music if I'm on the treadmill.
Right.
But when I'm working, I listen to books on tape,
Mm-hmm.
or I'll put in a movie I've seen a million times so I can see it in my head
Yeah.
and just listen to it. It's really just I don't like silence,
Mm-hmm.
and um, sometimes I'll turn everything off because my husband will play music a lot and loud, so I can listen to that. And he plays like one day it's Nina Simone, the next day it's Johnny Cash. I mean, it makes no sense to me. But he's really like he'd be better at answering that question. But so I do if it's coming from his space, but no, normally I'm listening to books on tape.
Okay, then. So, your favorite book, then? Do you have a favorite book?
Yeah. So my favorite, I think, all-time book is Close to the Knives by David Wojnarowicz. And he's one of my favorite artists. I'm very inspired by him. And that book is really like honest and brutal and New York. And uh, if you haven't read it, I think you'd
Yeah,
find it
what's it
very
about? What's
interesting.
it
And
about?
it holds up. I read it every once in a while. I also love Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke, but for different reasons.
Okay.
So
Yeah, but this is an aside, but me and my wife have made the conscious decision to not have our phones in our bedrooms when we go to sleep, which has unlocked reading again for us now. So we sit there and do a bit of reading. And with me, I always either read business books or comic books. So actually finding interest in fictions and biographies and stuff like that is tricky. So I'm up for recommendations like that. So it's called, what is it? Close to the Knives?
Close to the Knives, David Wojnarowicz, and the front cover are like these bisons going off a cliff.
Brilliant. That sounds perfect.
And I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but
No.
I would also look that up because it's just really important. A person with AIDS died in the 90s, I believe. Just really, really just profound work. It was just it's chilling and brilliant, and he lived a life that I was very attracted to, but a little fearful of. So it's an interesting book. Even if it's not sort of subject matter you'd be interested in, I think that you'd still find it an interesting book
Yeah, man.
because it's so truthful and it's a biography.
Right. Yeah,
So
I'm always up for
memoir.
that. I'm up for that. I like kind of reading things that I don't know whether I like. I just read some Alice Munro, which was short stories, and I was like, they were kind of interesting. And I read some Percival Everett, which was like a lot more to do with like race and stuff. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty good. I'll try anything really. Happy about that.
And this is also historical now in a different way. So I think you'll get a lot out of it.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to go and buy it today. Favorite film?
I'm so embarrassed. I want to lie and say a lot of different things, but it's probably like Working Girl.
No?
And that's only because it's a movie I've watched a million times. Same with Moonstruck. I think that it's because they're New York based, and I love the city, and they're funny, and Alec Baldwin takes his shirt off. I mean, very stupid reasons.
That's
I
fine.
also am like, a B movie for me is fine. I
Hmm.
just need a comfortable seat and all the conditions to be right. I didn't love Barbie. I'll tell you, I didn't
Did you not?
dislike it, but I thought it was going to be better.
Mm.
But it was fun. I was happy to go to the movies. I haven't been to the movies in a long time. But I'm just saying, like, it's weird. But Working Girl, I just think is hilarious.
Sometimes they don't make them like that, do they?
Person who like works hard and achieves. I
Mm.
like that story like that.
Was it?
So
Oh, it's like The Secret of My Success with Michael J. Fox. That's a bit like that as well, I think, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, that's a good movie.
Okay, so
I like. I mean, Priscilla. I mean, there's lots of movies that I think Jacob's Ladder. I think is just a great movie, and for very different reasons. I'd never seen anything like that. It scared the hell out of me. And I don't like horror movies. I don't put that in that genre, but it was pretty scary.
mm,
Do you know Jacob's Ladder?
I've heard of it. I haven't
It's
seen
a
it.
really good movie.
Mm.
Yeah, you should, so there are good movies that I enjoy a lot too, but Working Girl is probably my favorite,
There's probably more
the
of
one I've
your
seen.
work done
Moonstruck or
to.
Working Girl.
That's like the theme tune, isn't it, in the background of your work?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
like it. Is there a fact that not many people know about you?
Uh, it's pretty much, when you take pictures of yourself having sex through the 80s and 90s, everybody knows everything. But, uh, you know, I watch Judge Judy reruns too while I'm stitching. I mean, there's nothing really, surprising or secretive. There's no fun fact way down deep, you know. I wish there were.
Usually, and then you'll go, "Oh, by the way, I used to train seals in a circus or something," or just come.
Well, I do think like counseling men uh pre and post
Mm.
HIV testing was like a phenomenal honor in my life that I don't talk about. I don't. There's nothing. It's like there's such a private and personal moment that I can only be general about things, anyways. But like changed my life. So there's a lot of things in my life, or different things I've done in the hospitals working with patients that feel like secrets to me, but it's because I can't explain them and they're so significant, but they're also moments that aren't, shareable kind of things. So
Mm. Do you get any key takeaways from that kind of stuff? I know that there are people who've worked, in palliative services and stuff, and after a while, you get these themes that come from, I don't know, the regrets of people and that kind of stuff.
well, the it was interesting when I worked as a buddy. So I did this buddy program where I would go and visit people in the hospitals in the early 80s who had HIV AIDS at the if they were in the hospital. And so some were like prisoners, so there was a guard outside. But I was a volunteer for the AIDS Council of Northeastern New York, and I was part of the buddy program in the hotline. So I'd go, and and so I'm sitting there with nothing but my clothing, and the cleaning person would come in and look like she was walking on the moon. And so like there was instances like that where I thought, oh my god, what am I, like I'm very scared now because I don't have any of that equipment on. um it, that have profoundly affected me. But I'll say the other thing about working in the hospitals more recently was that creativity is healing. I mean, I knew that, and this organization I worked for, that was their goal. But I saw, like, I worked with this woman. She was in a lot of pain, but she had her young daughter with her. So she couldn't just sit with her pain. She was also caring for it. So I went in to work with both her and her daughter, and she didn't really want to work. She just wanted me to sort of work with her daughter. So we were drawing and making things. And I did a lot of mandala work. So that's what we would
Mm.
draw mandalas, or that would be my opening line, and they could draw whatever they wanted. And then this woman started drawing, and she was in severe pain when I first got in there. And I don't believe her pain was gone, but we worked for about an hour and a half, and we sort of like just worked, and it was
Mm.
quiet. And so I think she was at least distracted from her pain in a way. I don't think it alleviated it.
Took her mind off
I
it,
don't know
though.
what happened in that moment, but it was quiet for a solid hour, which it was chaotic when I had first walked in. And I owe that to, taking the time to be creative. So I do think about that, like with my life, like, well, I do get to come and stitch for 5 hours, and that's got to be healthy. So it's certainly not hurting anybody. So
Yeah, that's amazing.
So yeah, I think there was a lot out of working in that realm that is significant. I'm a bit of a hypochondriac.
Okay.
So it's also like, I think that draws me to work in those spaces. I want to be more familiar with my fears.
I wondered whether it might, like, those people have got actual problems, so it shuts out the noise of whatever your problems are in the back of your head.
Well, I mean, you usually are the healthier person in the room at the moment, but it's really more about walking alongside things and being helpful, like having a reason to walk alongside things.
Yeah.
So,
if people want to find out more about you, and they should, where should they go?
So if you go to my Instagram page, which you've linked to, that links to my website. It's got my phone number on it. I mean, like, it's not hard to find me. If anybody does ever come to the DC area, though, you should definitely look me up and come out to my studio and see my gallery. And if you're really interested, like I said, there's hundreds of studios, and there are people that come visit, and I drive around and go visit my other friends. With my friend runs this huge clay studio, and there's a beautiful glass studio. I mean, the Gateway Arts District is a phenomenal place. Like, I moved here and didn't know I moved into an arts district till a month after it. And it's been, life altering in this kind of support we have for each other and the community I live in. So, I mean, look me up if you're in the DC area.
I'm going to fire up my fantasy private jet, and I'll pop over and see you very soon.
Well, a lot of people do come to DC. I mean, the whole country takes vacation here. So I do get to see a lot of people and meet a lot of people that I've met through, like, Instagram and stuff, who come to the city. So
one day I'll do, like, NeedleXChange tour or something, and then definitely. It's been a long time since I've been to the States. So, hey, John, thanks for having a NeedleXChange with me.
Hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate you, your contest, all the work you do around the artwork and introducing me to so many artists on your site. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining me on another NeedleXChange. I hope you enjoyed the show. I'd love to hear from you, so feel free to email hello@needle.exchange, that's NEEDL.exchange, with any thoughts, comments or feedback. And if you want to keep up with all the news, sign up to the NeedleXChange mailing list at bit.ly/needleexchange. See you next time.